Привет, и от Reborn'a. На одном из моих последних стримов мой подписчик Давид через донатик, за что ему огромное спасибо, попросил меня посмотреть ролик с канала Тайрзу, я не знаю, как это читается. Ролик называется «Люди, имба». Давайте его глянем, надеюсь, будет что-то интересненькое. Поехали! Как это громко это было неожиданно. Ой, жесть.
Human beings.
Люди.
Are they as overpowered as the game's community would lead you to believe?
Это, короче говоря, что-то типа... А у кого такие ролики-то у нас выходили, блин, забыл, как его зовут. Ну, какой-то есть чувак, который вот эту вот всякую штуку такую же вот пишет,
Short answer,
делает.
Yeah.
Так.
They're the most meta-defining build of all time, and the undisputed top build in the current expansion. But believe it or not, this wasn't always the case. Humans
Так.
used to get body left and
Когда люди попадали на кладбище или на основе на тлапы
right
других
on a
игроков.
daily basis by other players.
Бывает, бывает.
And it took a pretty long time before the player base learned how to actually make use of the human build's unique abilities.
Ну, конечно, надо же это качаться,
The
прокачиваться.
story of the humans' rise to dominance is a really interesting one. And so today, we're going to do an in-depth look at the humans' abilities, their strengths, and their weaknesses.
Давай.
Because yes, they do have weaknesses. We'll also go over notable matchups, and finally look at the steps human players took in order to reach their dominant status. First, their unique abilities. I
Так.
touched on this topic in my video about primates, but I'll recap here and also go into more detail. First off the bat, we have their ability to throw things.
Кидать объекты. А что, больше никто не умеет кидать объекты? Мне кажется, все-таки обезьянки тоже это могут делать.
Other builds can throw things,
Да.
but humans can do so harder, faster, and
Да
further than
ладно,
anyone
ладно. Ну, я не уверен, если честно, то, что мы кидаем сильнее. Какая-нибудь горилла, мне кажется, кинет гораздо дальше и сильнее.
else. The reason for this is their body structure. Bipedal builds are tough to balance, both in the game
Так.
development sense and the center of mass sense. Throwing
Ну
an item
ладно.
with any real force behind it requires serious balance, achieved only by having shorter arms and longer legs. This is why humans can launch projectiles at deadly speeds,
Ну ладно, но что-то мне кажется, горилла все-таки будет сильнее и быстрее кидать.
whereas other
It-
primates
Так.
kind of just lob things without putting much effort into it. If they tried to, they would knock themselves over.
Ну ладно, тогда возможно.
Even if chimpanzees could figure out how to craft a spear, there's no way
Так.
they could throw it hard enough to deal any significant damage. Next, their stamina regeneration.
Блин, как он быстро разговаривает, я не успеваю читать субтитры.
Humans can chase down anything. You try to run from a human, you might outspeed them initially, but you'll run out of stamina much sooner than they will, and they'll catch up
Да ладно, серьезно, что ли, не знал об
to you
этом?
while you're in your weakened state. This is partially because of their
Странно.
superior balance again, but mostly it's because of the human build's unique choice to not spec into fur. This gives them access to the extremely broken ability Sweat.
Окей, из-за пота, ладно. Ну как-то я не знаю, мне кажется, я вряд ли кого-то догоню из каких-нибудь
Every
животных.
other current build that's decent at distance running recharges stamina by using the move Pant. This works great, but it does require the user to stop running.
Блин, подожди.
Stamina by using the move Pant.
Такая милая собачка.
This works great,
А,
but it does require the user to stop running. Sweat, on the other hand, works better while moving, massively extending the distance a human player can run. They've got a few other important abilities that are essential to their kit, but aren't unique to humans. Their ability to speak is unique among mammals, but some birds can pull it off
Вполне копируются некоторыми птицами. Ну этими, что ли? Ну так они просто копируют их, они же не понимают, что они говорят. Попугайчики.
too. In humans, the ability to speak allows them to use one of their signature moves,
Какой?
Teach,
Обучение?
which drastically boosts skill point gain.
Ну типа, мне кажется, некоторых животных тоже можно обучить, правда, гораздо сложнее, чем людей.
Mitigating the main penalty a player receives upon getting a game over. Humans and birds also share another unique trait, which is being able to stand upright.
Так.
Standing upright is extremely useful for dealing with stealth builds that might normally be using tall grass to hide.
Я его даже не заметил сначала. Создание орудия также часто считается за эксклюзивно
Dual
человеческую
use
черту.
also might be thought of as a
Неплохо.
human-exclusive move, and it certainly is the most effective at humans. But it turns out a pretty wide array of other builds can also do it.
Неплохо она так пилит.
Birds, primates, cephalopods,
И рыбы, приматы, головоногие, даже рыбы. Да ладно, что
and
не
even fish can use tools on occasion. But sweating and
Как там было?
birds, primates, cephalopods, and even fish can use
Способен использовать инструменты для некоторых
tools on
ситуаций.
occasion.
Окей, ладно.
But sweating and
Вот пот и броски доступны только людям. Перейдем к слабостям данного билда.
throwing,
Давай.
uniquely human. Now onto their weaknesses. And yes, it's true that currently most human players can subvert these with their crafting skill. But it's
Так.
important to recognize that without equipment, the human build isn't necessarily unstoppable. The decision
да.
to not have fur granted humans a massive buff to
Шерсть.
mobility at the cost of stealth. In the mammal fact,
Типа нас легче обнаружить, что ли?
Fur is a prerequisite to all the major stealth abilities like camouflage.
Угу. Ну, кстати, да, согласен.
And lack of stealth abilities means getting in close on their targets is a serious challenge.
Вот это он пересрался. А как это так? Что-то вы не слышите, что ли?
The human
Такая милая киса.
build's lack of fur also means they have very low defense.
Из-за шерсти меньший уровень защиты? Ну ладно.
Both from physical attacks and from environmental effect.
Так, это воздействие окружающей среды. Окружающей среды, да. Блин, а из какого это фильма? Где-то я видел такой, не помню где.
Their skin offers almost zero armor, to the point where even players from lower weight classes have no trouble dealing damage to humans. And bear skin also takes quite a bit of damage from the sun,
Это
too.
да, это жопа.
Humans are also pretty limited when it comes to the power stat. Physically, they're the weakest of the great apes, and don't really have any good options for dealing
Высшими приматами?
power stat. Physically,
А что значит высшие приматы? А какие низшие приматы? Точнее, мне больше интересно.
they're the weakest of the great apes, and don't really have any good options for dealing damage. They lack the classic high damage bite attack that nearly every other non-herbivorous build relies on, instead having to resort to blunt attacks like punch and kick, which we all know aren't very effective against builds that have thick fur or skin. The last major weakness I can see is that they're pretty bad at dealing with stealth. The lack of night vision
Типа плохо слышим, видим, да, замечаем все остальное.
means darkness can really hamper their ability to locate targets. And their lack of a strong sense of smell means camouflage is especially useful against them. Okay, now let's talk about matchup.
ПВП связки, ну-ка давай, кого мы там можем завалить?
Obviously, a key feature of the human build is being able to craft equipment. Given basic equipment like low-level armor and hunting gear, the human's best matchup is going to be medium-large mammals. Unlike blunt damage, piercing damage is quite effective versus builds with thick hide. But on defense, they're actually pretty awful. A human's only option on defense
Ну да, как бы раздавит, нафиг хана будет. Так, единственное, что может помочь человеку против крупного млекопитающего, это способность устрашения. Серьезно, мы сможем как бы устрашать и что-то сомневаюсь.
against a large mammal is intimidation, unless they've got some crazy high-level equipment. I'll make a video on power against a large mammal is intimidation, unless they've got some crazy high-level equipment. But I'll make a video on power creep later. The classic human equipment cannot stop a charging tank main unless the intimidate attempt works. But overall, this matchup is one of the reasons humans became top tier.
Блин, вот серьезно, если бы это было на русском, это было гораздо бы веселее и интереснее. А то, что чувак говорит по-английски, и мало того, что по-английски так еще и очень быстро, я даже читать не успеваю гребаные субтитры. Это бесит.
Hardly any builds have favorable matchups against tanks. But that's not to say humans don't have their counters, though. As I said before, stealth can be really effective against them due to their lack of a keen sense of smell and night vision. Humans have the ability to win pretty much any fight as long as they've got time to prepare. But taken by surprise, humans have a lot fewer options.
Ну да, вообще ничего не сделал, наверное.
Another thing humans have trouble dealing with is flight. Even when a human has a ranged weapon, players with high
это Resident Evil 3. Мобильность в воздухе будут сравнительно безопасны.
Aerial mobility are pretty safe during flight. Now, as far as I know, there aren't any bird builds powerful enough to one-shot humans, which is important because blunt attacks like punches are actually quite
Блин, господи, вот этот, звук был неожиданный.
effective against birds.
Так.
Birds have hollow bones that are resistant
Кость полая, дающая им сопротивление к растяжению, скручиванию, но не к сжатию.
to tension and torsion, but not compression. This is the opposite of mammal bones, which are resistant to compression and tension, but not torsion. The point is, birds aren't the best choice against humans, but flight has been unlocked by 4 different classes in the game. Birds, which we just discussed, aren't a good choice.
Так.
Bats, which do even less damage than birds. Reptiles, which unfortunately had their aerial ability
Забанены. Ну, даже с рептилий как бы не очень летают.
banned in patch 1.3.1.
И насекомые.
And insects. Flying eusocial insects have by far the best matchup versus humans in the entire game. Humans
Ненавижу
have
насекомых.
0 counterplay against a swarm of stinging insects. I mean, sure, there are special items that they can use to combat swarms if they're prepared, but the amount of human mains who've chosen that as one of their prestige abilities is pretty small.
А нафига нам надо?
Humans' lack of fur means they have no innate defense against stings. Stings also have the chance to proc the anaphylaxis debuff,
Проверку, а если не пройдет, то сдохнет, да?
which can actually lead to a game over.
Да.
And it's for this reason that the high score for human eliminations belongs to the Africanized honeybee, known better by its community-given name, the killer bee. And
Жесть,
even if
конечно.
the stings don't proc the allergic reaction effect, they will still definitely achieve their primary goal of dropping their
Убивает,
result
типа? Понижая боевой дух человека до нуля и получается... просто, типа, прогоняя его,
to
окей.
0, and granting you control over the territory.
Окей, неплохо.
And we can see that lately the viability of killer bees has only
африканизированных пчел с их экспансией территории после того, как они покинули...
growing now that they've expanded their territory
Ой,
outside of
жестко.
Africa. Which brings me to my main point. Are humans overpowered? Well,
Нет.
just like the Africanized honeybee, humans really only became OP once they escaped the African server and invaded other areas. Notice how humans took down megafauna across
Мегафауна на любой из серверов по сравнению с Африкой.
every terrestrial server
Кстати, да, наверное.
except Africa. The African tank mains have the matchup experience and counterplay options to deal
Поэтому не заходите в Африку и будете имбалансными.
with the vast array of skills humans have access to. But the rest of the community was totally unprepared to deal with the rapid invasion of new human mains invading their competitive scene. In other words, the devs could have prevented the massive
Да господи, я не успеваю.
destabilization of the current meta if they'd region locked
Да господи. Вот то, что я пытаюсь нафиг читать вот это вот субтитры, слишком погружаюсь, и вот эти вот просто звуки ниоткуда меня так сильно пугают, это бесит.
humans.
Так.
Staying competitive in the meta requires a good player constantly be leveling up their skills. There's no better example of this than the rapid rise to dominance that humans experienced. If you'd like to level up your own, no better example of this than the rapid rise to dominance that humans experienced. If you'd like to level up your own skills and unlock new ones, I highly recommend an online learning more.
Это уже реклама пошла, да? Но ролик, в принципе, интересный, но из-за того, что приходилось читать субтитры, я практически не погружался в то, что происходило на самом экране. К тому же я постоянно опаздывал и не успевал. Слишком быстро чувак говорит. Но в любом случае это прикольненько. Спасибо большое создателю, спасибо большое моему подписчику. Если вам понравилась реакция, вы знаете, что надо делать. С вами, как всегда, был Reborn'a. Спасибо за просмотр. Пока!